This is Product by Design, a podcast by Prodity, where we explore technology, artificial intelligence, user experience, product management, and the philosophy of building products and companies. Right, welcome back to another episode of Product by Design. I am Kyle, and this week we've got another awesome guest with us, Christoph Steinlehner. Christoph, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Let me introduce Christoph really briefly, and then Christoph, you can tell us a little bit more about yourself. But Christoph is a product management coach. He helps product managers and leaders who are feeling stuck in their work, caught up in endless detail discussions, and struggling to facilitate between different perspectives. And I'm excited to talk more about you and what you do within product management. But before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for this great introduction. I don't know what I have to say more. So my background actually is in interaction design. So I came from interaction design to the product field. And now for a couple of years, I work, as you said, as a product coach. And I help product managers and leaders to find focus and navigate their day-to-day chaos. And usually I do this by coaching and training, but also facilitating workshops and sometimes more as an embedded sparring partner. And when you work with me, you will see a lot of visual methods. And I think we will talk about this a little bit more through this episode.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm super excited because as a product person myself, I'm always interested in talking about methods and ways of improving product processes and other people's experiences. And so very, very excited to talk more about the things that you do and the things that you have seen and what you do with other product teams. But before we dive into that, why don't you tell us maybe what you like to do outside of the office or outside of product management when you're not working with teams or organizations?
So a lot of things. So basically, I think I feed my curiosity. So I love to travel. I love to have great food. I love to visit art spaces, read a lot, things like that. So a lot of different things which somehow stipulate my curiosity.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, we do like to ask people about some of their reading towards the end. So maybe I'll save that one. But is there a place that you have traveled that has been particularly kind of a standout for you, or maybe something that you have sampled or eaten that is a standout?
My best vacation ever, I think, was in Iceland. So I visited Iceland already many years ago with a couple of friends. We had a jeep and we traveled through this like completely surreal landscape. That's for me like what I really like. I also recently visited some deserts, and that's like spaces where I really enjoy getting, yes, new impressions, completely different things into my mind.
That's incredible. I've heard so many good things about Iceland, so it's definitely on the list of places to visit.
Definitely check it out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it continues to be on the place, so that's great to hear. That's one worth visiting. So I'm interested. You've obviously you mentioned that you work with product teams in organizations in their product management. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your journey? You mentioned kind of where you started in interaction design.
Yeah.
What brought you to what you do currently, and tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got to what you're doing now.
Yeah. So, as I think many people in the product field, I had a long and winding road. So, I didn't drop out of school and were a product manager. So, I started out directly after school without any degree as a web designer and developer in a huge company. And then started first studying multimedia production. So this was a combination of engineering, design, business management, all these things. So I learned being a product manager even before I knew there is a thing like that. So I went off and studied interaction design and went for a couple of years into spatial exhibitions, did a lot of things with technology, in museums, in trader shows, and things like that. And after that, I moved more into the like what we now call the product field. So I worked in B2C and B2B companies, did a lot of like healthcare, education, fintech, and then started out to do this like in interim roles, in fractional roles. And there I already like I taught a lot. So I was always like the external who knew another method. So people asked me. And I think Kyle, for you, it's the same. You're external often. People approach you because, like, oh, you're an outsider. I can talk to you,
Mhm.
or a leadership takes you to the side and be like, can I like pick your brain about this thing or that thing? So with this experience, I moved on and said, like, okay, that's what I'm really enjoy doing and where I think I have the most impact. So let's do justice as a coach and consultant.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the journey of kind of a winding road of getting to the place that you get to, because especially within product, it's never kind of a straight line. And
Yeah.
then two, finding that niche and finding the joy in that area of not just doing product management, but helping product organizations and working with teams and leadership and other groups to help not just do the product management, but how could we make product management better and find the right ways to do this. I'm interested, as you work
Hmm.
with organizations and teams, what have been some of the most common challenges or difficulties or things that you've seen, maybe across different groups or organizations, that maybe form a common thread that you've
Yeah.
seen?
Yeah. So there definitely is some things. So quite common is, especially if the organization is a little bit bigger, is too many directions. So there are many, many stakeholders asking for all of different things. And when I see this, I most likely, if I start to talk about strategy, they're a little bit like, yeah, we have something there in some PowerPoint deck, but nobody's looking at this. So it's
Mm.
quite unclear what actually the strategy is and how it connects. And another thing I find really interesting is there's a lot of inward looking often. So I think it's natural that people like who they see every day, their colleagues, this is the topics they're thinking about. So this colleague wants that, the marketing wants this, oh, sales is coming around the corner. But they lose a little bit the connection to the actual customer. They lose to think about, like, okay, who are we working for in the end? So who is generating the money? And with that, it's also ineffective communication. So everybody talks to everybody. It's like endless meetings, endless discussions, and it connects all together. So unclear directions, too much communication without any target, and then just navel gazing.
Yeah, I can I can relate to all of those in so many different ways, and I'm sure anybody listening can really probably feels that in so many ways. I want to probably pull on a couple of different strings that you
Yeah,
mentioned. Let's talk about communication first, because you
yeah,
mentioned that. Why is communication such a difficult thing within an organization? And it's probably across both large
yeah.
organizations and even small organizations. What makes good communication so difficult, for not just product teams, but for everyone? Why is that difficult? And what are some of the difficulties that we have in achieving good communication?
Yeah. So I think one really important thing is that when we talk about communication, we are always like, okay, we have to express ourselves better, we have to speak better, and things like that. But there's the other part of communication, which is the listening part. So we have to listen and have to listen well and really understand what the person approaching us wants to communicate. So often we don't even ask like questions or not good questions and are not really aware that there is another perspective, another mindset. So we just dismiss this and are stuck in our own head. And with this also, we oftentimes like avoid then the disagreement. So we maybe sense there is something different, but we are just like, ah, it will sort itself out or something like that. And of course, like always this will hunt us. Always there will be like, if I dismiss the disagreement in the beginning, it will come back weeks or months later. So oftentimes we just see like, ah, yeah, okay, ah, yeah, I will do it and come back. And then either the people are not reacting anymore or they're actually coming back with a result which is totally unexpected. So the classic thing, a team goes away for 2 months, comes back with, oh, we are finished. And leadership or the stakeholder or the customer is like, okay, but that's not really what I had in mind. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure so many of us can relate to something like that. In creating good communication, I think you've touched on many of the issues that we can find. What have you found are some ways that we can overcome some of those challenges that we have? And what are some ways that we can create either good communication or effective communication within a team or across different teams, with stakeholders, or within a broader organization?
Yeah, so I mentioned that before. I'm a big fan of visual artifacts, and not just because I have a design background. It led a little bit to this way because when I communicated with people, I then went back to myself and drew out customer journeys and service blueprints and flowcharts and things like that. But at one point in my career, I was in the situation where I had to lead 10 teams. Everything was totally unclear. We moved from a one time purchase to bundles and subscriptions. So, more or less everything in the journey had to be somehow touched, but nobody knew where to start. So, I did a lot of like mapping, but for myself to make sense, but it was still complicated. And then at one point, as I brought these maps into this group discussions, suddenly something changed. So people suddenly started to talk about this thing. So they pointed at things and be like, oh no, you're not right there. That's not what I meant when we talked about this. So now what I'm doing is bring visual artifacts. So I bring artifacts which are easily to change. So I never like draw a beautiful thing in Figma and be like, okay, that's like the truth. I really look for evolving maps so everybody can chip in with like on a wall with stickies or like in remote settings as we are most of the day today in like virtual whiteboards. And I bring a little bit like this workshop behavior. So everybody of us, I think, have been in a workshop and enjoyed this time, and it was an offsite, and everybody had fun, and it was like so productive. And then they're going back on reading emails and sitting in meetings, and it's fine to do these workshops, but oftentimes we are not really bringing this techniques over to our day to day. So I try to bring these techniques over to our day to day and anchor like with visuals, with stickies and so on, our conversations to align around one
I
thing.
think that's such great advice. Bringing like the principles and frameworks from workshops, which we find so effective, into more of what we're doing. And I do something very similar. The idea of like bringing the visual more and more into what we're talking about. And I found this as well to be incredibly effective. Uh, Bringing something that is very workable into the conversation. And I feel like the lower fidelity it can be, the more changeable it feels. And so, like, as we
Yes.
bring things, and that's why also I found this is great when I'm creating something, making it so that it doesn't look polished. And it's not just because my design skills are not UX, polished design skills, because that's part of the reason why it doesn't always look great. But also because if it doesn't look great, then nobody feels like, okay, we can't touch this thing.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
final. That way it looks like, okay, this is not something that is final great looking. It's something that is just a mock-up. It's a draft. Like we can change this thing. Let's like put our own thoughts into it, because it is not something that has the finished thing that we now, it's this is what it is. Bringing that so that people can point to something and say, okay, I understand what I'm looking at, and now I can make changes. I found that to be so effective. And even if it's just something that is for us to visualize what we're talking about, it makes it so much easier for everybody to be able to look at something and say, okay, I understand what you're saying now, or I understand what this document is saying, or I understand what you're trying to convey to me. Because so many people are more visual than they are uh, written or oral, or whatever it is, and being able to point to something and make those changes. I think it's an effective way. So really like what you're saying about bringing those
Hmm.
frameworks into what we're talking about in
Yeah.
order to make the communication more effective. Ultimately, that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think you had you just said it on a really important point, because like if something is polished, everybody just naturally expects that it's well thought through. It's like it's the truth. Nobody will even like question it or look deeper into it. And even if they see an error, they will suspect like, okay, then I might get it wrong because oh, this person already like thought it through. But if it's like scrappy and it's inviting for change, and also you do this verbally, so you map something and you go to a person and be like, so that's just like how I understand it currently. I'm pretty sure there are many errors in there. I'm pretty sure I got things wrong. Can you help me correct that? Can you help me to bring your perspective into this? It's a different way of like communicating. That's also why I really don't like to see PowerPoints in collaborative meetings. It's like somebody is presenting, and a PowerPoint is by definition not easy to like change and like revisit and take apart. It's somebody is presenting. It's a good format for that, but most of our meetings are not presentations.
Yeah, I love what you said there too, because a PowerPoint by its own design is it's a finalized version of something, or at least it's presenting itself as that. It's
Yeah.
presenting itself as the polished version of it. Just like in Figma, if something is designed and polished, it's presenting itself as the final version. Whereas
Mm,
if we are creating something that is meant to be changed and updated, that PowerPoint just by its nature isn't allowing for that. And really, really good looking designed mock-ups just by their visual cues are not allowing for that. And so bringing in either the through the tool or through how we're presenting it, the cues to allow people to say like these are changeable aspects, like we want to invite collaboration and communication, we have to use the right tools and we have to use the right visual cues in order to do that. And there are certain
mm.
things that dissuade people from collaborating and communicating if you are using the wrong tools or using the wrong type of communication. I think that's such a great point that you made there.
And it enables people to also see the whole picture. It's another difference in communication when we speak, when we have emails. It's like a long thread. It's like I get hooked on a detail. But if I see like a full customer journey, I can jump back and forth and go through like detail levels pretty easily. And we can say like, but we talked about like 5 minutes about this point here. I think it's connecting to what we are now discussing. So these are cues where people are like easily jumping between abstraction levels even. So I find this quite helpful in this settings.
Yeah. I think these are great points. I love it. I think this is such a great thing to talk about. You mentioned something else as well. The idea of the nasal gazing and being so focused internally versus externally. I think this is such a huge problem for so many teams, and it's obviously something that you're seeing as well. That we
Mm.
can get so wrapped up in our own internal communication or
Mm.
internal groups. What have you seen with that, and how have you helped groups stop focusing so much on maybe what the sales team is saying and
Mm.
focus more on what users or customers are saying?
Yeah, for me, a pretty easy technique is a customer or user journey mapping. So you start with the journey map and you can take your current service, application, whatever you have, and just go through the steps. What's happening and where is your team responsible? For example, you are part of the shopping team and are managing like search and the catalog and things like that. You can just map this out. What are people doing? What are the steps from where they're coming into your part of the experience and going out of the experience? And then what I do is adding more and more layers. So add like who is responsible for the things, which technology are we using there, what processes are there, what regulations are there, and things like that, and bringing there together a picture which is always anchored on the customer journey, but also looking like what's internally having. So of course we will talk a lot about our internals. We need to talk about like how our systems working, what is the approach for that, what are the processes internally, what is the legal side of things, and so on and so on. These are all important topics and a lot of things we have to consider, but anchoring that back to what is actually the customer expecting at this point and what do we want to present to them is really helpful to have more or less the x-ray through our organization.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point to be able to look through not just the what we are doing internally, but what is how is that impacting externally. And I don't know if I said nasal gazing or navel gazing now, so I'm trying to think back, like, did I am I like, are we nasal gazing or navel gazing? So anyway, hopefully I'll have to go back and make sure that I don't know where we're gazing now. All right. Talking about the the strategy as well. You mentioned, and this is such a huge topic, and we were talking about
Yeah.
it a little bit earlier. You're really understanding the the strategy that we're trying to implement, and how do we do that? And obviously, this is probably a topic that we could talk about for hours and hours. In smaller terms, um, how do you think about product strategy and as far as its importance and the way that companies are using it and teams are using it, and either thinking about it or not thinking about it from your experience?
Yeah. So I think one part of strategy, which is maybe not enough discussed, is the foundation of strategy. Because to do good strategy, you need to understand your situation. You need to understand your landscape. So the first thing is like to make this visible. What are you oftentimes we stay in the abstract, we be like, ah yeah, there will some AI will happen and we have this technology thing, and but what does it mean? So get concrete on one hand to what your actual situation is before you're even thinking about what are our options, and then really looking into, okay, what are our risks in there? What are our options? And from there, you can start to take strategic decisions and you can like think things through to a certain amount, because you also like while doing this, you should also look into, okay, what are the alternatives? What could also happen? So we wish for this path, but there are like many other paths, what would it mean? And I don't mean it into going into an over analysis mode and spending weeks and months in just like, again, navel gazing. Um, but really like make this conscious, bring this on everybody consciousness, the different contexts, the different, like, okay, what are the technology limitations we have? What are the technology opportunities we have? What do we know about our customers? Where are the tricky parts in their lives where we can really be a help? And with that, then you can start to focus and be like, okay, there are my leverage points. These are obvious things we can fix and we can expand. Yeah, but without, oftentimes strategy is just like, oh, I just need to make a decision or just make a plan or even make a big plan for years and months ahead. But without this foundation, it's quite hard to do, or it's like not, probably not working out as you imagine.
Yeah, I think that that makes a lot of sense. And I think the foundational part of strategy is so important to how we approach it. And I feel like teams or organizations can often get lost on either side. Like you get too much into focusing on it and you become lost, like you said, in like we're just going to spin on it, or you get so lost potentially without it, like you don't have anything and you're just kind of spinning on we're just going to execute, and we have maybe no clear direction. And so
Mm.
what are some of the actual tools or maybe frameworks or things that you use to help teams who may be in either direction? Like, maybe they are navel gazing or they're just constantly spinning on strategy and thinking about it, or maybe they really don't have any direction at all and they're just like out there doing things. Like, what are
Mm.
some of the things that you go in and maybe help use or implement or think about to make this more effective?
Yeah. So let's explore this two paths. So either they are like stuck in analysis, stuck in, oh, we have to understand this better. Just start walking with small steps. So there is this, I like this concept of crossing the river by feeling the stones. I don't know. I heard that somewhere in the strategic context, and I really love this picture because it's like you're walking through the river. You don't really know where the next stone is, but you can like do step by step, and over time probably you would get clearer how the river is and things like that. So start moving. For the other case, if you're just moving in every direction, oftentimes what I see is missing is the communication flow up and down. So it's pretty so the leadership thinks everybody is like working towards this thing, but they don't really see what's happening. And the teams are not really able to connect to these big goals. So it's an exercise, for example, to really talk with a team and let them explain, okay, you have this small ticket right now on your desk. How does it ladder up to my big picture from leadership? And not just like this direct connection, but what are the steps in between? What are the layers? Because in the end, like strategy is a layered or nested approach. You have the big goals and then it goes smaller and smaller and smaller. It's like I even sometimes call it a fractal. The deeper you zoom in, the more detail you get. And communicating that and making it visible, again, sorry about that. It's like for me quite magic to see like, okay, what are the layers? What does this impact? What does it mean to the next thing? And so on. And starting this discussion is, in my experience, quite helpful instead of just thinking in, oh, we have to do this feature or we have to reach this big goal, which is fuzzy, abstract, hard to catch.
Yeah, I have found that as well, and I love the idea of like one on one side, kind of like you mentioned, like taking those small steps and just moving forward, because I think that whether you're talking about like at a strategy level, at an organizational level, like really just you like moving forward, and even at a team level, like there is some uncertainty, but like you said, you can cross the river by feeling those stones, and you can move forward by taking some of those small steps. And on the other side, like you're starting to really bridge some of those gaps in communication, like we were talking about previously, and really helping people understand like where uh, where the thought from leadership is and from higher up, and then how all of those things fractally start to come together. I think that's a fascinating way to think about it. um, I'm interested. You use something called the mapper method.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that. What is
Yeah.
that, and how can people benefit from it?
Yeah. So it's more or less it's something I'm currently working on. It's still pretty fresh in my mind, but all what we just talked about it, I wanted to start to formalize it a little bit because I'm approaching again and again like same challenges, and I have a little bit my approach, but I wanted to formalize it. So I developed now this mapper method, and since it's visual, everybody is welcome to just reach out. I'm currently have a preview of a short guidebook. So I'm happy to send this around for free. So please just reach out. So the Mapper method has 6 steps, as Mapper has letters. The first one is like map your thoughts. The first step is really to get clear for yourself, because oftentimes if you just jump into a group, it will get chaotic. So the first thing is like understand what you are understanding, and by mapping it out, for example, in a customer journey, like mapping's just a step a user is doing or a customer is doing through your product. And you will find that like just by doing this, by expressing it, you will get clearer. Have to make some decisions which you thought you made in your head, but you didn't. So that's a forcing function for that. And then with that, as we talked about, bring this to other people, invite them to critique, acknowledge the perspectives. The second step is really getting the feedback from a group, from individuals. And with them, in the third step, you then point out the assumptions and the risks. So you have some future state, then it's like, oh, we think this should work and we should think that should work. And just extracting this and ask for existing evidence, ask for high risks, and so on. To directly move into the fourth step, which I, like in my example, have an assumption map. So we plan and act then. We extract the assumptions. We say, like, okay, this is with low evidence but high importance. What are we doing about it? Are we doing some more research? Are we doing a small prototype? Are we already at a stage where we can A/B test this? Or a lot of different reasons. It really depends on your situation, but you need to define small next steps, as we just discussed. And then step 5 and 6 is evaluate whatever you learned from this and reflect on it. So these are the 2 steps. And of course, it's an iterative process. You know, not doing this once and then be like, oh, finished, my product is done, I can go home. Of course, it's getting like quicker, it's iterative. You will like update your map, you will go into the next assumptions and risks, and so on and so on. So it's just a guide for you to anchor your conversations, concentrate that you keep like focus on one thing, and go through cycles. And the cycles are not new. I don't invented the cycles. It's classical, agile, design thinking, whatever you want to call it, approaches.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and kind of brings together probably things that, maybe people have been thinking about or have been doing in a variety of different ways, and is a way of saying, here is what you need to be doing in order to uh, maybe move something forward, or here's a framework you can use in order to move this forward. Um, And as you were talking about it, like, I was thinking through, like, here's things that I know I have teams working on that potentially could benefit from, like, hey, let's just kind of like you said, let's really focus on working through maybe a cycle of these things. And for me personally, like maybe mapping out what this is and then going through and talking about it and then looking at like some of the risks and assumptions and then going through kind of cyclically. I'm interested, as you have been maybe implementing this or working with people to implement this. How has it changed maybe the process that they have gone through
Yeah.
in order to work through either things that they're working on or products or just workflows or assumptions that they
Hmm.
have in order to help kind of organize the thought process or the things that they have in flight?
Yeah. So I can give a recent example where I worked with a team. They worked on an internal training platform. So, as many big organizations have, they had an internal training platform, and they had the challenge that they have courses which are just like on demand. So, but they didn't know what the demand is. So they heard like people wanted to do this, but there were just like you entered the site, there were no dates. I couldn't book it. I couldn't express that I wanted to do it. So obviously they were like, okay, we have to solve this to help organize the future courses. And so they started out to plan like, okay, we need to have a button here. And they also utilized a couple of third-party solutions. So it wasn't even that easy to just add a button. And oh, we need a messaging system, and oh, we need this and that. So they already spent, I think, probably 10 to 20 hours in meeting, like figuring out what they need. And they asked me if I can help a little bit to facilitate this. So we started to map out this journey pretty quickly in 20 minutes. We mapped out the journey from somebody like finds the course, is interested, can book it, and so on. And we found out that just by mapping it out, the most critical part is that somebody needs to be able to express they're even interested. That was the biggest assumption, that people will do that. That people won't just be like, oh, there's no course, then it doesn't matter that much. So what the team did with that was adding into a text field the email address of the course coordinator with a small message, please contact, if you're interested, please contact the course coordinator. So they immediately, like with 1 hour of work, they had something where they can prove this is even worth investing more. And of course, they had like 5 other things on their plate, which also were important. And they could go back there and wait like a couple of weeks to get like, how much interest is there even? How many people are even like interested in these courses which are not available yet? So something like that, like seeing on a map, oh, that's the most critical point, and then rethinking possible solutions is something I haven't discovered without making it visible, without like also appreciating the work from before. That's another thing. So we mapped out like all the functionality they had in mind really roughly, but at this point then it didn't matter anymore, and it was no discussion that, oh, but I thought so much about this feature already, we have to build it.
Yeah, that's such a great example of, I think, a couple of things. One, the power of mapping things out, which I found to be just so useful and so helpful. And then next, just really visualizing things. Like the more we can visualize what it is that we're doing, the easier things can become sometimes. Like when we just lay it all out visually,
Mm,
then it becomes such an easier thing to say, okay, now I understand it. I understand either this process or this user flow or this user journey, whatever it is. And now we can really talk about it in a way that we couldn't before.
yeah, I have a theory about that. So I think that we can't really dissect things in our mind. We have to have it in front of us. And so as soon as we see it, we can start to think about it. And as long as we keep it in our minds, we are trying to like critique it, but think about it, and it's not working. It's just not working. So at least for me and a lot of people I meet, it's not working. You have to put it out there. It's like also as you write something, as soon as you start writing, you see like, that are actually my thoughts. That's
Yep.
what's unclear. Things like that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's a big reason why I, for one, started writing out a lot of things was just for my own personal clarity, was so that I could actually put all of my thoughts down and
Mm,
understand what it is that I'm thinking. And like you said, for teams, either writing things out or mapping them out, just so that everybody can understand and visualize what it is that we're all talking about or what we're thinking, because we may not be thinking the same thing, or we may not be able to even visualize it until we put it down somewhere and say, okay,
mm,
this is what it is. Is
yeah,
this what everybody's thinking? And have we missed anything?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, very good point.
Yeah. What advice would you have for anybody looking to get into product management or really looking to uh, move their career forward in some way? As you've
Mm,
worked with lots of product managers and product teams, what are some of the things that you might give advice on and say, here's some advice that I would give if you want to advance your career or even get into the industry?
yeah. So I think for newcomers, the first thing is like landing a product management job directly from college is pretty hard. I have found. So and there's also not really a college for product management as far as I heard. So it's probably also questionable if there is a direct way. So a lot of product people come from engineering, design. I saw amazing product managers from customer support. That's a really good way where also like it's oftentimes easier to land a position. And then I would look for a company who is doing this well, because the PM job is there's so many different shapes and forms of what a PM or a PO is doing. So look for a company where you have the feeling, oh, that's looking like a great company, and talk to a lot of people before and be curious about things. And the being curious is like for every PM, I think. So look inspiration in a lot of fields. I love to read analysts. I love to read like other things like politics, technology, regulation, culture stuff. I think it's so important. And if you want to transition more into leadership, the first thing I think you have to learn is to manage and coach. That's a different thing. You don't do that as an IC. You start to do this as a leadership, and you can't jump into a leadership position without being able to mentor people, without being able to coach people. So this is something I always say, like explore these fields more, explore psychology, explore like how you communicate with people, how you can also work politics. As bad as it sounds, it's part of the game. That's like what you don't most people don't need to learn another framework or something like that. Try to learn new mindsets.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, Christoph, this has been a really great conversation. I have
Yeah.
a couple wrap up questions that we like to ask everybody before we finish up. But before we do that, where can people find out more about you, about the work that you're doing, or if they want to get in contact with you about any of the Mapper method or about any of the services that you offer?
Yeah. So there are two main places. The first one is LinkedIn. That's the easiest one to reach me. The other thing, if you want to learn more about visual things, is I write at mapperclub.substack.com. And as I said, reach out. I'm happy to share the Mapper guide with you, everything for free. And if you have any questions, just reach out. I'm always happy to have a nice conversation, as this
Okay,
was.
awesome. Well, we will put those links in the show notes as well so you can click them.
Perfect.
Awesome. All right. So we like to wrap up with a couple questions, and these do not have to be product or business related in any way, though they
Hmm.
certainly can be. And going back to what you mentioned at the very beginning, if you have read or watched or listened to anything recently that you would like to share.
Yeah, so I'm currently still watching West Wing. I know I'm very late to the game, but since I moved some time ago to DC, it's a must watch. So it's a series about the White House staff, and I really enjoy it because it has like great characters, great study about human interaction and politics. Yeah, definitely. But it's 7 seasons, so it's a long thing to watch.
That is a good one, a classic one, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Awesome. And then final question, if there are any products that you've been using and enjoying, or maybe not enjoying, you could give an anti shout out, but it could be a digital product or a
Yeah.
physical product. If there's anything that you've have liked recently.
Yeah. So big shout out totally to the people at Todoist. It's a small to-do software, which I'm like a long-term user. I'm at the maximum karma level and everything there. And I really love about this product that it's like constantly evolving. There's always something new. So they just released a calendar feature, which is pretty great. But at the same time, they're pretty agnostic to your own workflow. And I think that's such an interesting combination. They have like a lot of powerful features which feel naturally, but every time I watch a video or I see somebody else using it, I'm like, oh, you're using it wrong. I'm totally using it different. So that's what I really love about it.
Very nice. Yeah, that is. I've heard that one a number of times as just a really, really great app product for a number of
Yeah.
things. So that's a great one. Okay. Awesome. Well, Christoph, this has been a really great conversation. I think a
Yes,
number of topics that have been just fascinating to talk about. And again, we could probably go on for a while down a
definitely.
number of different areas. So appreciate your insight, appreciate the conversation, and look forward to hopefully talking again at some point because I think this has been really, really great.
For sure. Yeah, thanks. It was big pleasure. Really had fun. It was really great to be here and hopefully sometime again.
All right. Well, great. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening. If you like the show, be sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can follow the show on TikTok at Prodity.co and on Twitter at ProdityCo. You can also follow me on both of those platforms at Kyle Larry Evans. If you want more product conversation, check out my newsletter Prodity at Prodity.co. You can also follow me on Medium at Kyle Larry Evans, or check out my Medium publication, Prodity. Of course, you can check out all these links in the show notes.